the Stokes County Board of Commissioners Planning and Community Development meeting, Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020 at 7 o'clock. As always, we'll start off invocation. I'll ask Commissioner Lankford if he would lead us.
Okay, let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we come before Thee this night, we ask Thy blessings upon each one this year, upon this meeting. Give us wisdom and understanding of what our role is for the community, and always let us be guided by Your wisdom and Your knowledge. And let us always praise You every day, because You, the Almighty God, that we love, and You are the one that we look to for all things. But we just ask You to be with us during this meeting. Go with us now, lead, guide, and direct. For we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Please continue standing for our pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start off with approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Now move on to our public comments. If you would, you have about 3 minutes to talk. When you come up, just say your name and address, and we'll start with Valencia Bullins.
Good evening. This is the first time I've ever done this, so I'm here concerning the solar farm, and my name is Valencia Bullins. I own a large tract of land that adjoins the west side of the proposed solar plan. My property shares a common creek with a proposed solar farm. A major concern of mine is a lack of county ordinance and oversight regarding these large-scale solar farms. It was apparent in the zoning meeting that there were more questions than answers in regard to how the county would handle specific situations. Therefore, the decision by the zoning board was an interesting one. A predominant point of concern regards the future. What happens when these solar farms are decommissioned? What happens to the metal, the glass, the fencing? Who oversees the decommissioning? As I understand it, the property owner would see the necessary steps are implemented at the end of the lease. But suppose the energy company changes hands, suppose environmental issues arise and the energy company is not responsive. Will there be routine water testing of the retention ponds to assure there is no contamination from herbicides or other chemicals? Testing of the retention ponds to assure there's no contamination from PFOS, PFOA, Gen X, cadmium, telluride. If you have questions about what these acronyms and compounds are, perhaps more discussion is necessary. Another question, who monitors the implementation of the bond before decommissioning? At the end of life, who is making sure it's done right? Agriculture and solar energy could coexist, but our county needs to lay the responsible groundwork for making sure that we can have it, so that we can, at the very least, have a way to mediate through any potential grievances that would arise in the coming years. The project on Fowler Road in Walnut Cove has not been the best example. Going forward, decisions you make now can affect what happens at the end of life with these farms. What we do not want to see is unused structure littering the landscape, retention ponds, and soil with contamination, disassembled or outdated structures with nowhere to be recycled. As commissioners, please do your part to secure the beauty that our county affords. If solar farms are in our future, possibly an acreage cap, allocation of a set amount of acreage dedicated to solar farm usage within the county. Let Stokes County be a leader in the best practices to ensure that developers, landowners, farmers, and citizens are equally represented. Again, my concerns stem from the fact that the proposed farm adjoins my land. Bear Branch Solar has reached out to me and hopefully will be addressing concerns that I have with the initial setback proposal. This demonstrates to me that they, Bear Branch, is trying to do what's necessary to be a good neighbor. But let's also make sure that our county has the proper groundwork to protect everyone. And I thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. That was the only speaker we have for public comments. Now move on to the public hearing, the presentation by Mr. David Suthers.
Good evening. The first presentation we have tonight for the case, the rezoning petition, is for the Denny Family Trust, is to rezone approximately 1.723 acres from residential agricultural to residential agricultural conditional zoning for the purpose of subdividing the property for a one-lot major subdivision for a single-family home. The property owner is Denny Family Trust, and the applicant is Clayton Homes, Wayne Ratcliffe. This is a portion of a 7.63 acre tract. Does everybody know where this is located? Right basically where Denny Road comes out into Highway 66, across from where the boat repair and trailer that was, we've been through zoning hearings on that in the past 10, 12 years. This property has been approved for a 3-bedroom home by Environmental Health, and the driveway access would be off of Highway 66. Emergency services would be coming from the King area. And the surrounding land use is residential with commercial across the road. Mixed use is up and down NC Highway 66 in the King area there around Chestnut Grove Road. The reason the petition is stated is the subdivision regulations allows me to approve up to so many lots per parent parcel. And at this time, this would exceed that number. I've spoke to the planning board. We may need to address is the 25 years has gone by since the subdivision regulations were put into place, and some of the reasons that these standards were in place then were to cover specific things that were coming up. We may readdress this to allow a little more flexibility, because as long as they have road frontage on the state road and can comply with everything else, this is more procedural than there usually is an issue with the actual request. But as we went through this from the planning department or planning staff, we don't have any problem with this request. It'll meet the minimum lot size. Public water is available, and again, they have septic approval for a 3-bedroom home. The planning board recommended this unanimously, 8-0. Felt that the proposed lot would be consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan for the development in the area, and that it was a reasonable request. The applicant had a public information meeting on the 24th of February at 6 p.m. and you've got attachment B there for minutes. I think they had one person show up and was didn't have a problem with the request. Do you have any questions for me? I don't think a representative of the Clayton Homes is here tonight. They came to the planning board to answer any questions, and there were no questions really concerning this proposal.
Any questions or comments from the board? I believe we're good on that one.
All right. Any motions, please? I'll remind you of this every time. Please make all your motions for approval or disapproval based referencing the petition's consistency or non-consistency with the Stokes 2035 plan, and that it is a reasonable request.
I have a motion on this one.
We approve. And it is consistent with the 2035 plan for our county.
Second that motion.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Let's see, moving on to the rezoning request. Now we've already done that one. Which one's the next one right here? Except for Mr. Stewart. Clayton.
We just did this one.
Yeah, we just did that one.
What is this? That's what B.
That's the stuff for, as a letter. guess it's from Clayton Homes. Move on to attachment C then. It's the rezone request, conditional rezone request, Adam Stewart, number 20-156.
Ready? All right. We've got two from Adam Stewart. Don't want to get them confused. This first one is to rezone approximately 6.09 acres from residential agricultural to highway business conditional zoning for mini storage warehouses and climate-controlled storage facilities. The owner and applicant are Adam Stewart. The property is located on NC Highway 865, approximately 700 foot west of the intersection of NC Highway 865 in Germantown. The total tract is 6.74 acres and the proposed parcel is 6.09. The property is currently vacant. And I'm going to assume everybody knows this site when you come down. Adam has been here before with other petitions. The last one, I think we had the Dollar General, which is the site was Dollar General. This is the property that's in between the Dollar General and Creekside Supply. It is the vacant property in between. The property, there's a small portion of the property that is, well, there's a portion of the property in the rear that is in the floodplain, but there is no proposal as you see on your maps. Now, you have small maps available, and I have some larger ones. If you want to look at them, I'll be glad to provide you a couple of them. Y'all can spread them out. Just let me know. But there's no construction or proposed construction within the floodplain area or storage. It's not in a watershed district. And there's no septic or water approval. We do have public water there, but we don't have septic. And the problem with this whole property that Adam has been able to develop was the lack of septic. And this is what's caused the need for coming up with ideas that would be able to utilize the property for commercial purposes that didn't need septic. Well, mini storage warehouses is probably one of the few things that can be done on the property that doesn't require septic approval. He has had the site evaluated, and I went out for an initial evaluation when he did Creekside, and there's not a lot of area in Germantown, in that particular part of Germantown, that would be suitable for septic disposal. Emergency services, rural all volunteer fire department, EMS out of Walnut Cove. No erosion control will be necessary until he actually begins construction. In the state controls, there were some questions at the planning board hearing concerning water runoff and potentials. There will be some, during the construction process, there will be some erosion control measures, some sediment ponds will be developed. They'll be removed at the site, but all this will be approved and monitored by the state of North Carolina, as we don't have that expertise in the county level. Access to the property, there you see a DOT letter in the first that was approved on March 18th, 2020, granting access that was currently serving the Dollar General. It was always, when that access was granted from the Dollar General, that proposal was made. If you know that driveway, you can see that it was made to serve this, the remainder of this property. Again, there's no real problem with this. This is what it was suited for. DOT give an approval letter based on those specifications that they, if you'd like to read what they required Mr. Stewart to do or will require him to do. Again, in this area, we have mixed uses. We have residential. We have a lot of commercial. And that goes from the county line all the way to Walnut Cove, 8 and 65. When it turns into 65 going straight to Walnut Cove, there's mixed uses up and down the road. So it is consistent with that. As always, you want to consider the impacts of any commercial development that we bring in on surrounding development, the consistency with the plan, impact on surrounding community, infrastructure, increase in commercial tax base, potential opportunities for employment, community acceptance, and traffic generation. There's approximately 11,000 cars in the last average daily traffic count right in that general area there. And if you've been down there, there are lots. I mean, that's a real busy road. Lots of traffic, and good for his commercial type development where people will come in. I mean, you get run over down there. I wish they'd make the road a little bit wider. I was trying to put the signs out there and had my rear end out in the road a few times, and you really feel the wind, especially on this piece of property, because got a bank it goes down, but lots of traffic. And from the staff standpoint, the applicant is proposing to construct 287 mini storage warehouse units, two 80 by 150 climate control storage facilities, one 40 by 175 foot covered car storage area, an open area for the storage of RVs and boats in the rear of the property. He's looking at doing it as a phased project. If you'll see on the map, you'll see phase 1 and phase 2. The applicant also had property zoned down the road in front of the school bus garage, Creekside, Creekside self-storage. From talking to Adam, it's been fairly successful, and therefore he sees the need to build more units in the area. Again, from our standpoint, he has been approved for other commercial districts, and this is the only logical use of this property. It's infield. And from a planning standpoint, we have this area that he has developed, and this is the last parcel that can be developed in that area. And from a planning standpoint, that seems to be the appropriate use of the property for commercial. And the fact of the lack of sewage disposal, the mini storage warehouses seem to be an appropriate use. And the planning board voted 8-0 to recommend this, stating it was consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan. It was a reasonable request based on the fact it's adjacent to other commercial, and it is an infill type development. And the applicant is here if you'd like any specific questions. And like I said, if you'd like to see the larger map or detail, I'll be glad to give you the maps to spread out.
Any questions or comments from the board?
One thing, Mr. Chairman, as far as I know, the one, like you said, that he did before has worked out well.
Yeah.
We had some neighbors, I think, back then that
something about they didn't want a tree
concern.
buffer, but I've not really heard anything after the initial proposal. They've been constructed, and you can ask Adam about occupancy, but as far as I know, mini storage warehouses seem to be a good business to be in. There's quite a few of them in the county, and they all seem to, I've actually had more requests of people looking at them.
Now, the fact we haven't had any issues with the first one, I think speaks well for doing some more.
Yeah, and it was a similar situation with a piece of land that would not pass a soil evaluation for anything.
Any more questions, comments?
I'd make a comment. Adam has, I was on the planning board before when he asked for the other building that he wanted, and he's really a good businessman. And he's always what I consider done right and fair. So I know he'll do it on this one. Mr. Comment.
All right. I have one comment as well. Adam, I appreciate you keeping your business here in Stokes County, and I wish you all the best of luck with these. I hope they stay full for you. And some good renters. Do I have a motion on this?
Yes. Make a motion we approve.
Base it on the plan. And
Yeah, based on a 2035 plan.
Okay. I have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now move on to item E. Rezone request. Let's get another from Mr. Stewart, number 20-157.
All right, we get the second phase of the project on this larger parcel here. A portion of this, if you'll look on your maps, adjacent to Creekside, which was on this vacant property, that the majority of it would be now utilized for mini storage warehouses and climate controlled facility. He wanted a portion of this to go back into the existing Creekside business, which if approved, would be combined into that parcel of land for the purposes of, on 0.65 acres of this, to rezone this from residential agricultural to highway business conditional zoning for 4 greenhouses. And again, Adam's the owner and the applicant for this. And this is on the same side of the road, just about 400 foot farther down the road, 1,100 foot from the intersection of the road. The property now is currently vacant, as was the parcel with the mini storage warehouse proposal. The proposal to add greenhouses to the Creekside Supply Company property will not require an expansion of the septic disposal area, because they simply would be just going through the greenhouses and can utilize the facility which is in Creekside Supply. Again, any erosion control measures would be taken at the time of construction. The surrounding land use is basically the same as was stated before. We have mixed uses. We have, this would complete the infield of commercial development along this site. And I've got to say, from a standpoint, I remember going out to this site 20 years ago or more, and people wanted to do a haunted house. It was, Jake, remember, it was the Hartgrove property at one time, and it was just derelict property, grown up, an old house on it. We had to run the people off from doing an unsafe situation there. It's one of those pieces of property I never thought would get developed. And again, from our standpoint, this creates an infill of development which finishes the commercial aspect, which is something that's very good for the county and as a proposal to make sure that all the usable spot, there was no other good use for this property except for commercial, since we had so much around it. I'll not go, you know the existing businesses, and the issues to consider are basically the same as before. As always, you want to consider the impact of anything. The greenhouses will supplement Creekside Supply, giving him an opportunity to expand his market for sales and things in the area. Again, these are 4 30 by 80 foot greenhouse units on approximately 6,500ths of an acre. Adam stated in the meeting that, he would build a couple of them and see how they go. He's proposing 4, but he wants to see, if they're going to work. And if they don't, it can be, it's just a portion of the property at that point. The planning board recommended by a vote of 8-0 to recommend approval based on the same statement that this is consistent with the Stokes 2035 plan and a reasonable request. Adam addressed there were concerns about access points. It is a difficult turn in there, and Adam has tried to do some internal work, but as far as the actual driveway access and anything that I have any say-so on through DOT is that driveway access was approved at the point Creekside Supply was zoned years ago. There's just tough when you come in there because people want to make an immediate turn where the building is situated. And if you look or pay attention, you come around and you go behind the building. There's adequate room to do it. It's just people don't read the signs. But there's really nothing on the end of being able to do anything much. That's a DOT issue, and Adam has complied with the standards he needs to have the driveway access there. He's got it paved right there before you go onto the gravel part. And I guess part of the problem is he has good business, so there's some issues sometimes with the traffic and everything. He had a public information on the same night as before, February 26, 2020. You can ask Adam about any questions or concerns that were brought up at the meeting on that. We would recommend this is to finish the infill of commercial development along NC Highway 8 and 65 in the Germantown area.
Any questions or comments on this one? I have a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve this HBCZ, I guess it is, Adam Stewart, for greenhouses on 6.74, am I right?
0.65 acres.
0.65 acres, okay. I'll put that in form of motion.
And it is part of the 2035.
2035.
2035.
Consistent with the plan.
Yeah, consistent with the 2035 plan, Stokes County plan.
All right, I have a motion of a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. I'll move on to attachment G, the rezone request for Bear Branch Solar LLC 20-158.
We're gonna need to let him set up a little bit.
All right, we can take it.
Longer in the planning board, so I'll go get him.
All right, what we'll do, we'll just take a quick recess, about 5 minutes. we'll call the meeting back to order. We'll go ahead and pick back up with there with attachment G, the rezone request for Bear Branch Solar LLC 20-158.
All right. As you see before you, you have some maps, and the applicant will provide larger maps. They've been updated based on planning board information, so I'm going to let them take care of that. But you have a general site map of the property, and this is Bear Branch Solar LLC is requesting to rezone approximately 499.4 acres of a 744.57 acre tract of land owned by Wilson Samuel Farms of Stokes County LLC from residential agricultural to M1 light manufacturing conditional zoning for a 35 megawatt AC utility scale solar photovoltaic facility. Property is located on the east side of Tillable Road, approximately 850 foot south of the intersection of Fulp Road and Tillable Road in Walnut Cove. Again, the site owners are Wilson Samuel Farms of Stokes County LLC, and the applicant is Bear Branch Solar LLC. Property is not currently addressed and is located off of Tuttle Road. Again, the request is coming to you as a conditional zoning, so you can talk about everything site specific. A portion of this land of the parcel is located in a flood hazard area along the Dan River. The portion of the parcel proposed to be utilized for solar panels, however, is located in a Zone X, which is an area determined to be outside the 500-year floodplain. It's not located in a drinking supply watershed area, and the site will not require septic or water approvals. Emergency Service, Walnut Cove EMS, and Walnut Cove Fire Department. Erosion control, the applicant is aware of the need to for an approved erosion control plan from North Carolina to any land disturbing activities. This is standard procedure for any large-scale development or any building permit that is issued for disturbing 1 acre or more of land. Access to the property, the applicant would be required, to, if approved, to have access approval off of the state road, Tuttle Road, from North Carolina Department of Transportation. I look for average daily traffic counts on these secondary roads. We didn't really have any. They are secondary state roads, and everybody knows where Tuttle Road ends. It feeds into 311, and it's a good cut through to get back up to. I won't say a Walnut Cove bypass, but I use it all the time, so you don't have to go through town if you're heading back to Danbury. Surrounding land use, this parcel, or the project, is located on a single parcel of land. And it has one access off the state road. The other portion of the property on the eastern side would be bordered by the Dan River. It is bordered by residential property. There are some houses to the north of it and agricultural property to the west and to the south. This was part of the old Harston Plantation property and has remained this way. Well, I've been here for 32 years, and then that particular part of the road looks about the same as it did, except for some residences that have been developed a little bit north. You can go over the issues to consider. There is, you will have in your letter, I think Richard Brim provided something to Jace that Jake requested. You'll have a letter there concerning increase in tax due to commercial property and a rollback tax. The best utilization of the existing land, a sustainable energy source, short-term job creation, and should be considered the long-term effects of the project and compatibility with surrounding development. Again, it's site-specific. You can talk about the site plan. They will provide an updated site plan. There were comments at the planning board. There were some concerns about potential runoffs. There were concerns about the decommissioning. There were concerns about the recycling of the materials used on the plant. And these come from the citizens that showed up at the planning board meeting. There was a pretty lengthy discussion concerning different issues along the property. Go over some of the brief things for the parcel. The applicant is proposing a project that would contain 114,372 solar panels. This information I received is off the platform from the developer. Tom, if there's any changes or anything in there, both the Toms, just go through it. What we're looking at is a 20.5-year lease with possible 4 or 5-year extensions. So the lifespan of the property could potentially, you're looking at 40.5 years. The applicant, I think there were questions that the last time we had a hearing like this, what the solar panels would be, Hanwha Q cells or equivalent. I looked up some of this stuff, but it's panel is a panel. I'm not familiar with this, so it didn't mean a lot to me. The panels were approximately 3 by 6 in dimension, situated a maximum of 15 feet off the ground. They're adjustable to maximize the efficiency of the production of the energy. The applicant states in their submitted site plan the solar facility would be enclosed with fencing 6 foot tall with an additional 3 strands of barbed wire. Fencing is required. It is a power generating facility, so fencing it's not really an option. This is their proposal. There are some updates on this that the applicant will give, but as of today, and you'll see a letter in there from another attorney, Karen Kimmerwright, which she's been in front of the board before, addressing the fact that the facility has not received its approval from the Utilities Commission for the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. It gives you the dates that it went through, the dates it was advertised in the newspaper, but a final disposition or approval has not been heard as of today. A utility substation will have to be constructed by Duke Energy. On the site plan, you see a proposed location. As with the last, Duke Energy has to approve this. They have not, as of yet, approved any utility substation to take the power generated by the solar facility to put it back into the grid. This is taken. This would be, I guess, will be taken care of by the applicant. But as of now, we don't have a specific approval from Duke Energy. Again, this is site is a one single parcel. As before, we had multiple parcels, and it's stated for a different location in the county. Close, but not. It's different in its makeup. It's bordered by the river, a single road, a large tract with a portion of the tract still being wanting to be utilized for agricultural production. The approximately 500 acres that would be utilized would be the lease area for the solar farm, and there would be additional couple hundred acres to farm. I don't have planning staff. We didn't have a problem with the proposed location. I feel like it's a pretty good location for this type of facility based on some natural buffers. There was some issues brought up at the meeting about additional buffering based on adjacent properties with residential that could be taken care of if, should be taken care of if any approval process is granted by the board. This would need to be addressed. It's a secondary road. We don't have any current public or sewer facilities on the property. I think we had a potential plan that down the future there had been some look at maybe running a water connection, sitting in on some meetings that would go from 89 down, approximately down Tillable Road to 311. But those are a lot of proposals when we're talking about the water systems that are way in the future. But as far as infrastructure, is limited infrastructure in the area. This type of facility, if constructed, there's some short-term employment involved. You also got, I think, some information concerning that. The applicant had been in touch with Will Carter, our Economic Development Director. I spoke to Will briefly. We didn't have a long chat, but we did talk briefly today. And he could provide information. If approved, the applicant would submit information to him so that Will could get the word out for potential contract work or supplies, whatever the facility might need. The one impact that can't be determined at this time is the long-term effect on the surrounding community. The county has no track record or past experience with dealing with these type of large-scale solar facilities. October the county approved, or the commissioners approved, 616.67 acres in the county's jurisdiction for the Lick Creek Solar Facility off of Martin Luther King Old Town Farmer Road area. They stated that it would take anywhere from 18 months to 36 months to get the facility up and running. Mr. Delafield stated in the meeting that he thought this would be quicker, around a year, assuming, I guess, all approvals. I'll let them address that part of it. The conditional zoning aspect does give you the ability to, with agreement from the applicant, to place additional conditions, things like buffers or anything that's offered that you think might enhance or make a facility of this type better. As far as, you know, I think we've discussed this, Duke Energy by 2025 has to have 8% of their total production in renewable energy source. It's one of the reasons that are generating the interest in solar energy in these large-scale facilities. And again, Duke is the client that this would be sold to, the electricity generated to be sold to. There were questions about decommissioning. I think the applicant has promoted some new information about decommissioning. We do know that at the last meeting, the same thing was stated, that the state of North Carolina by 2022 is supposed to have a statewide decommissioning plan for solar facilities. I've been on the internet, read some of the information. I guess they're meeting. The pandemic has slowed a lot of things down as far as their progress. I don't know. Don't know where they're at currently on it. But decommissioning is a part of the necessary requirement. The state wants to address that, and from what I understand, it would be retroactive to any facility already approved. Now, how that would work, I have no clue. In this case, there are a lot of unanswered questions as far as what the future may hold for this. But if approved, we had some conditions that were placed on at the last hearing and the approval, and I would recommend, at the minimum, to stick with the same basic conditions. It required a minimum of a 50-foot landscape buffer. The applicant, I think, is choosing to do some more in certain areas. Again, I will let them speak to that. That would be the minimum setback off the property line for any facility or any portion of the facility at that point, the structures on the facility. The fencing not necessarily would be that. We'd be looking at the panels themselves. And from the county's perspective, if approved, the planning staff would recommend the applicant developer submit a final site plan showing a detailed layout of the facility, including the location of all solar panels, associated equipment, including access points, interior service roads, setbacks, and vegetative buffers existing and planted. The county would also recommend that all setbacks for the facility adhere to the front yard setback, which is in the M1 Light Manufacturing District, which is the 50-foot I explained. The planning board, and I need to explain the vote, we had an issue, and I never had come up before. We had one member absent, and so we got a vote of 4-3 with one non-excused abstention. And when we checked the next morning, it did pass. It was recommended 4-3. Got up with Shannon. I talked to Ty later that afternoon, but I'd already had to send the agenda out because I had to get a quick turnaround. And Ty stated that based on your rules that the board adopted, that any non-excused abstention to vote is considered an affirmative vote. So I need to record it. It was 5-3 to approve recommending the rezoning request by Bear Creek Solar. The planning board did, and their bylaws do cover what they cover is a tie vote, but they had nothing in the bylaws to state it. So Shannon and I have been looking at a lot of how voting takes place and stuff in the last couple of days, but just an odd situation that I'm going to address with the planning board so that doesn't happen again. The gentleman should have voted, but we'll take care of that at the next planning board meeting.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board?
David, you was talking about the same conditions, setback What was that?
50 foot.
50?
50 foot from all, because you don't have a traditional setback. In all districts, you have a front, side, and rear. This is no real traditional setback because we're talking multiple small structures in it. So 50 foot is a buffer. That was what, at a minimum, that's what I would recommend. I think the applicant, based on things I've reading in some of the site plan, and terrain features also have that they can be adjusted. They seem to propose to have adjusted some setbacks based on some comments received at the planning board meeting. Like I said, that's the applicant's prerogative to listen to what is said and then make adjustments to their plan. But as long as we've had to deal with this, we had such a quick turnaround. We usually don't have a meeting on Thursday. I usually have a week in between to get all the information to provide to you, but I had to get it done just slightly after lunch on Friday. So, and the applicant was making changes to the plan which we received today. And you can take time to read over them, and the applicant asks the questions about the adjustments to the site plan. And like I said, if you have any other questions for me, be glad to try to answer anything I can.
Question, please. David, I've noticed on some applications we have a list of questions from the public meeting, but I can't find it for this request. Have I looked over it? I probably have.
Should be on attachment H.
I got an attachment H.
It shows you who the surrounding property owners were and the public information meeting. Did you not get an attachment H, Jimmy?
Yes, sir, I did. I remember seeing attachment H.
It's the Bear Branch Solar Public Information Meeting Summary. It's not a long one. They held it at the Walnut Cove Library. They didn't have a large crowd. I think Rick was there, but you can talk to the applicant about, because that's the thing that I require. The ordinance requires it, but I stay out of it. That's the applicant's meeting to determine if they want to pursue on with a formal application. We just require it, and I take the typewritten minutes and the attendance and make sure that they had sent out the mailings to it. But other than that, I don't have any part of that meeting.
So you do not have a list of questions that happened at that meeting?
It does say right here, also discussed. Again, the applicant would be there. Some, you're right, Jimmy, some put down exactly what was stated. There is no specific requirement for it. It is, I tell each applicant, I said that it's required that you have typewritten minutes. And you state what goes on in the meeting, and then of course it's like, there's no format to do that. It is a public information meeting, and again, more questions are generated, but the applicant's here to answer those questions. And again, we got some people in attendance, I think, in the audience that were actually at the meeting that could better tell you. Like I said, we're not involved in that part of it.
Okay. Thank you.
More questions, comments on this?
I have some for David later, but not now.
Okay.
All right.
Y'all want to, I'll go ahead and do your presentation now.
Thank you, Chairman Nicholson, members of the board. I'm Tom Terrell with the law firm Fox Rothschild. I'm here tonight representing Renewable Energy Services. It's a family-owned North Carolina company that is one of the oldest of the solar developers in North Carolina. And they were a company, and they are a company that has been earning a reputation community by community of fair dealing with all their neighbors, collaboration with communities. I think Mr. Sutters would tell you they are very responsive to questions and comments, and they're going to show you tonight that they listen very closely to neighbors and to planning board members. And that's how they operate. I'm going to give you a very big picture overview and turn it over to Tom Delafield of Renewable Energy. As a short introductory summary, for those of you who are not familiar with solar, a solar farm is nothing but a series of panels that sits in a field and passively receives sunlight and converts that sunlight into renewable energy. That's all it is. It is technology that's as old as I am, but it's only recently that that technology has been able to be used profitably and economically on a larger scale. Over 99% of the materials are nothing but glass, steel, and standard wiring. On the question of impact to the community, it's one of the lowest impact uses that we have. Far less impact than a standard subdivision. You cannot hear a solar farm, unlike a subdivision that has lawn mowers and leaf blowers. It does not generate traffic, unlike a subdivision. You cannot smell them. They are dark at night. There are no toxic or harmful emissions. There has never been, that I have ever seen, a study that shows that a solar farm has negative impact on adjoining properties. And the reason for that is that solar farms have none of the characteristics of those uses that have been found to have negative impacts. They must meet all state building code. They must meet all erosion and permit control requirements. They must meet all electric code requirements. They have to meet many other governmental codes and regulations, in addition to which they have to follow all of their own self-imposed regulations, which are in your book that we're going to hand out here. In fact, hand those out to the board. We're going to walk through this with you in just a second. They have to go through regulation at the North Carolina Utility Commission. They have to get permits from NCDOT and all of that. The tax increase to this county is going to be exorbitant when you compare it to what's currently coming to the county from these exact same acres. In addition to that, solar farms are not consumers of governmental services. All a solar farm does is to help you pay for services that you have to find the funds for to cover other people's services. Not 1 acre of the agricultural portion of this property is going to be lost. You won't be able to see it from Tuttle Road. If you ever drive down Tuttle Road, you're going to have 500 feet of natural vegetative buffer between you and the first panel that's out there. It is the thickest vegetative buffer from the roadway I have ever seen in the 8 years of representing companies doing solar farms. The project represents an applicant coming to you asking to invest $35 million of improvement in your county. This applicant has also agreed, and they've put this in writing, that they will coordinate with Will Quarter at the Economic Development Office to make sure that as many local businesses, local service providers, local vendors, and local job applicants have more than an equal chance to compete for the many contracts and jobs that will be involved in the construction of this farm. My friend Adam Stewart was sitting here earlier. I think he has left. Adam Stewart has at least one company, maybe two. He and I have already spoken today, in fact. Adam can bid on these jobs. Adam has companies that can help clear. He's got a company that can do the grading. He's already working on solar farms. And when somebody local like Adam Stewart gets one of these contracts, he hires local people. He hires folks to do his repair to equipment who are local. He buys his fuel locally. And all of those employees and people who work for him spend their money in the community just like every other person locally who gets a contract or who was hired to work here. When that money is then respent in the community, it's called a multiplier effect. I've been in many, many zoning and land use cases over the last 35 years. That's all I do. In the broader context, this has not been a controversial case. We have had a couple of neighbors who have had questions and some concerns from the beginning, but I would describe that as in some general and even rational anxiety related to something that is new and different to them that they've never experienced. But our dialogues have at all times been cordial, and I think that the company I represent has been extremely responsive with information to them and even making site plan and other changes in response to their concerns. Please don't forget the property owner. The property owner whose family has owned and been paying taxes on this land for over 200 years, in fact, almost 235 years, has some rights here. And she is trying to exercise her property rights in a responsible and thoughtful manner that benefits everybody concerned, including the county. Some of our presentation this evening is going to be a standard presentation, but some of it is going to be new information that is responsive to what we heard last week at the Planning Board. Several questions and concerns were raised there, and the applicant listening came prepared to respond. Some of those new conditions and materials are going to be woven into the presentation by Tom Delafield, who will follow me in a moment. Very briefly, one of those concerns that was presented by the Planning Board was the purchase of the panels from a Chinese company. And if I could hear correctly from back where I sat, that was why one of the board members chose to abstain, because he said he didn't want anything bought from China. That company, Hanwha, that's listed in the staff report, the company that is the most likely source of these panels is from South Korea. It is not Chinese. It is a South Korean company, and I think all of you know that South Korea is a wonderful ally of the United States of America. Another question related to the end of life of a solar facility is called decommissioning. We're going to address that in some details in a minute. Ms. Bullens addressed decommissioning a little bit when she spoke during public comment, and she had a lot of questions, but not knowing the answers to questions does not mean that the answers are not there. I ask you to keep decommissioning at end of life in a proper context. And if you think about it, there is not a single home, there is not a single shopping center, there is not a single fast food restaurant, there is not a single convenience store, there's not a single factory, not a single barn, not a single doctor's office in this county that has a decommission plan. None of them. No buildings that you approve through the building code or through zoning that come here do you require to have a decommissioning plan. But this facility will have a decommissioning plan. So let's keep that in mind. Now, she asked about recycling, what will happen. There's a lot of money in the recycling of these component parts, and they all are recycled. Another vague concern that came up at the planning board was that some of the planning board members just had not seen a solar farm. In fact, that was what they said, that they had hesitations because they just hadn't seen one. And they were hesitant to vote yes on that basis. I'm going to show you some quotes. We reached out to some people with some experience in solar across North Carolina. I can give you the email and the phone number of every single one of these people to verify if you need to. Chris Sandifer is a member of the Nash County Planning Board. I know Mr. Sandifer from solar farms down there and some other contacts, but he says we've approved 37 solar farms in Nash County, many of them 50 megawatts and larger. This is a 35 megawatt. Many of them 50 megawatts and larger, and so far all we do is collect taxes on them. If there's a downside, we haven't figured it out yet. It's nothing but a win-win. Roger Davis, planning board member in the town of Calypso, population 438. It's in Duplin County. Our first thoughts about solar were hell no, but we decided to listen, and now one is up and running and nobody has a problem with it. People don't even realize it's there, and another one we approved was started just 2 weeks ago. Ira Howell, retired farmer in Cabarrus County. This is his income. It's hard to make money from farming. I know that. My dad is 93 and he farms, And I can tell you right now, that's the quickest way to become poor. So I leased 52 acres to Strata for a solar farm. The county was getting about $200 before, and it gets about $6,800 now. Who can argue with that? Now Duke wants to 70 acres next to it. The rent pays me a lot more than what I got for corn and soybeans. Just a couple more. Don Truel. Don is the Davidson County Commissioner. Some of you might know him. In Davidson County, we've had good experiences with solar farms, even including the extra large ones. Once they're built, the neighbors realize they much rather have a quiet solar farm than a subdivision next door. Our agricultural economy hasn't been hurt, and we have got one of the massive solar farms here in Davidson County. It has not caused any problems that I'm aware of. There are several more farm sites already approved and in process here in our county. From Greg Elkins, County Planning Director in Bladen County. This is the last one. In Bladen County, we have approximately 15 solar farms. And some of those, by the way, are the massive solar farms. Those aren't the small facilities, ranging in size. Over the years of operation, we have had good experience with these facilities. They have not caused any adverse issues that I'm aware of, and they have provided an increase to our tax base. I'm going to ask Mr. Tom Delafield to come up here in a minute, but before I do, I just want to take 2 minutes to walk you through these materials in case you want to refer back to them. On the second tab, there's the letter that was sent to adjoining owners. This is the best primer I've ever read about what solar is. It's very simple. It's in a Q&A form, and if you have a question and it's new to you, this letter to neighbors probably has the answer to it. There's the letter to you that you've already received from the property owner, followed by the statement that she's going to read to you later tonight. We have 3 new area site plans that we're providing you. These are new and updated from what the planning board got because we've added some buffer to this. The next tab shows you the buffer that's been added along the side where Ms. Bullens is, all along the western side. We have some photos at the next tab to illustrate how thick some of that vegetation is. The tab after that is some tax comparisons where we're showing you visually what this county will receive from a solar farm versus what you currently are getting. Those lines are so skinny at the bottom as to what you currently are getting and will be getting over time from this same acres. This is what Mr. Sandifer was talking about, which says if there's a downside, we can't figure it out. If you have questions about health and safety, there's a paper from North Carolina State University that's here in the notebook. We have a market impact study by Mr. Kirkland. Mr. Kirkland's here tonight. He has been described by people other than me as the country's foremost authority on the impact of solar farms on adjoining property, and he'll explain to you. He says, you can't get a facility like this if you can't hear it, see it, smell it, doesn't have any traffic generated. You can't get the data to show it harms property values nearby. There's a paper next to it if you have questions about how you balance solar with agriculture. This is a very good paper. Once again, this is coming out of North Carolina State. We have, after that, a letter to Mr. Sutter from Ms. Cameright that talks about the status with the North Carolina Utility Commission. It is not yet approved, but what Ms. Cameright says, we are expecting the Utility Commission will grant the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity very soon. And what she says in the body of the letter is that there were just it was published in the paper, there were no negative comments from the public, and it is, it has already met the qualifications for that certificate. I'm going to ask Mr. Delafield. He will show you what's in the next tab, but this is an engineer's assessment of how much those components of a solar farm are worth at the time of decommissioning. Now, this is a present value determination, but it does have an engineer seal. The names have been blocked out. But what it illustrates is that at the time of decommissioning, there is money there. You can't abandon this because steel can be recycled, glass can be recycled, etc. Mr. Stokes mentioned House Bill 329. We attached that here at the next tab. House Bill 329, it was passed last summer by the General Assembly. You will see at the end that it has Speaker Tim Moore, and instead of Phil Berger's got Ralph Heiss's signature here on the back. All they do in this bill is to assign this issue of decommissioning to the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission that's coming up with standards. Mr. Sutter has already said that those standards will be retroactive to farms. If that is correct, then you know that the state will have standards that will apply to this farm. If it turns out not to be the case, actually I think it will be the case, but if it turns out not, we are presenting you with a decommissioning plan that's not only better than the one that was approved with the Lick Creek Solar, but as far as decommissioning plans go, it is an outstanding plan. And then the last thing about proposed conditions, we have put all of these new conditions about decommissioning, working with your economic development office, vegetative buffer increases in the setbacks, and about maintenance. Those came up at the planning board. We have made those into binding conditions that we ask you to impose on this project. I'm glad to answer questions, but if you don't have them, I can turn this over to Mr. Tom Delafield for some presentations about other issues in this matter.
Any question?
I have one quick question. On this chart with the taxes,
Yes.
is that saying we get a cumulative amount of $1,080,000 over 40 years?
No, that is not. I think Tom will explain that. Would you like to explain that?
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, it's a million over.
I believe so.
Oh, okay. But it's, I have to.
If so, I have the same chartsmanship issue I had last time you guys presented to us.
The important thing is that it shows what the comparison is.
Yeah,
if
well,
it's just
yes, maybe your definition is 1,000% increase, which equals what, $27,000 a year over 40 years? Or did I?
Yeah, there's a comparison, and it does incorporate appreciation over the lifetime of the project using the Stokes County tax code.
Okay. So it's $1,080,000 for 40 years. Lump sum, okay. Got it, that's all I have.
Okay.
Mr. Walker, Ms. Wayne.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions, and I don't know when would be the best time to ask them. It might be better to wait and see more information and then see how many are answered during that process.
I think we'll have a lot of information that would answer those. After Mr. Delafield speaks, we have Mr. Kirkland, who's here, who's going to present his study on property values, and also the property owner will be speaking. But I think Mr. Delafield will probably answer a lot of your questions.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
That's all I'm trying to make it look like it's a big giant increase. $1 million over 40 years. $27 more we're getting now, but it ain't a lot of money. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Good evening, board members. Hope you're doing well tonight. Thank you for having us. Tom referenced we're one of the oldest companies in the state, and we may not look it, but we've been doing it our whole lives, and there's another generation behind us who couldn't be here for health reasons tonight. I'm going to start with the general description of the facility. talk a little bit about some of the development that we've done to date, some of the permitting required for solar farms like this, the utility approval impacts, dive a little bit deeper into the tax base benefits for the county, what the operations and maintenance look like for such a solar farm, and the decommissioning at the end of life. Jumping into the general description, we originated this project with the Paleys in July of 2019 and have been developing it with them since. To give you a sense of scale of this project, it is a 500-acre project and approximately an 800-acre tract. That 800 acres is based on a Google Earth measurement. I know it's listed in the county records as 744 acres. That parcel is primarily used as a timber farm today with 15 to 20-year-old mature pines and about 100 acres of agricultural land. Today, we are committing to not utilizing any of the agricultural land, and the entire footprint of the solar farm will sit within that timber farm. The project is 35 megawatts AC, enough capacity to power over 4,000 homes, and it's located off a total road approximately 3.5 miles as the crow flies from Walnut Cove. Mr. Suter mentioned some of the equipment that we will be using. I mentioned the hand watt panels, though we have not purchased any panels that include the or equivalent there. We are committed to using Tier 1 bifacial panels. So a bifacial panel is a panel that absorbs energy both from the front and from the rear on the sort of bounce of energy off of the ground. And Tier 1 means that have been, I guess, vetted by a third party and meets qualifications for production volumes, capitalization, and liquidity requirements, and has been in business for at least 5 years. The purpose of the certification is to give the market and folks like yourself confidence that the manufacturers who stand behind these panels and their warranties will stand the test of time and will be there if there's ever anything to go wrong with the panels. The racking that will hold the panels is single axis tracking, meaning that it starts the panels facing east as the sun rises, and as it progresses over the sky, the panels track it and end in the west for resetting for the next day. Both of these pieces of technology are best in class in the industry and are designed to increase the efficiency of the solar system. The ground cover underneath the solar farm will remain grass. It's done that way to minimize the impact. This is not a situation where we're going to go out and pave 500 acres or anything like that. It will remain permeable and will again be covered with natural grasses. By state regulation, as Tom mentioned, there is 6 feet of security fencing surrounding the site with 3 strings of barbed wire. Projects of this size typically are built in 9 to 12 months. So we believe that we're about a year away currently from construction. So that will place the solar farm being operational in approximately 2 years. The solar farms are typically built in steps, and each step brings a different crew to the construction site. So that's anything from earth movers to electricians, but in total there will be hundreds of folks in and around the community eating lunch, grabbing a coffee, buying a spare part, and otherwise supporting local business as a result of this project. Tom mentioned it in his presentation as well, but we're excited to be working with Will Carter, the EDC, to make sure that as many local businesses have the opportunity to participate and partner with us in this project. Solar farms of this size, and specifically this one, have an estimated usable life of 35 to 40 years. That 40-year usable life begins with a 20-year contract with Duke Energy, who guarantees the purchase of the power that we produce. Following that 20-year contract, there are shorter, more transactional extensions with Duke Energy, but throughout the life cycle of the project, it will be comprehensively insured. The most notable characteristic of this project is how significant its undisturbed vegetative buffers are on all sides. There's over 500 feet of undisturbed vegetative buffer from the public right-of-way Tuttle Road, and 75 feet of undisturbed vegetative setback join the properties along the western boundary. You have the Dan River and its floodplain in the rear. Again, we will not be building in the floodplain. And the Paleys will retain some acreage to the east, which they will continue to farm for trees and perhaps build a retirement home there. These setbacks go far above and beyond both the county ordinances and staff recommendations. We are 150% of the staff's recommendation on the western boundary and more than 10 times its recommendation on the front. There will be no lights on this facility, so it really will be invisible, inaudible, and unsmellable. Beyond perhaps a monthly maintenance vehicle visit, you will literally never know that it's there. The site was originally designed and submitted differently, but since then we have solicited and listened to feedback and adjusted our plans accordingly from neighbors and from the planning board. At this time, I'd like to show some photos illustrating what that boundary looks like. Following some feedback from the planning board on Thursday evening, some folks were having a difficult time visualizing exactly what the layout of the farm would look like from property boundary to the beginning of panels. So we were able to get our engineers to put together a sketch drawing showing each of the steps, and hopefully you find it helpful. So along the western boundary there, just if you wouldn't mind, I'll stand right beside it. This here is the property boundary. It runs, has kind of a jut out here, and is probably the closest to some of the homes right here. So I would fix this location. This area is the 75-foot of undisturbed vegetative buffer. Inside it is at least 100 feet of a shade setback. So obviously with solar panels, you don't want to put the panels too close to the trees, or it could affect the efficiency, and they won't produce quite as much energy. So outside of the 75 feet, there's about 100 feet that will separate the tree line from the fence line. Inside this setback, if you will include any necessary retention ponds or anything like that. Following the shade buffer, there's 5 feet allotted for the security fencing. There's 20 feet allotted for a security road, and an additional 5 feet from the security road before the panels start. So in total, from the property boundary to the beginning of the panel is 205 feet at the very least. And over, let's call it, 125 feet from the end of the vegetative buffer. This is essentially the same drawing, but done with an aerial photography overlay, just showing how wooded this western boundary is. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time here, but I guess it's important to note these residences here. This one is at least 1,100 feet from its nearest panel. Moving away from the engineering sketch, this is a picture of the vegetation at what will be the entrance to the solar farm. It's an existing logging road today, and as you can see, as soon as the road takes a turn to the left, it pretty much disappears behind the trees. We plan to improve this road and utilize it for access to the site, so it may be widened a little bit, but our intent is to maintain this aesthetic and this much view shed moving forward. This is an identical slide to the one just shown, with the exception of the green arrow at the bottom. It's meant to provide reference for the following two photos to give you an idea of what the boundary looks like when in those trees. This is a look at the creek in between the property boundary. As you can see, this is a pretty significant water feature, and one that by state regulations will likely never be constructed in. As you can see, it's filled with primarily hardwoods that stay leafy probably 9 months of the year. And again, there is a significant topographical dip here in between the two properties. The second photo is taken from essentially the same location, but looking back into the property, into the Paley property. The gentleman in the background is 50 feet. And so you can imagine that the trees there are pretty heavily wooded, and another 25 feet behind him of undisturbed vegetation is going to be very difficult to see through. And then once you get to that 75 feet of undisturbed vegetation, you will have another 125 feet before the panels start, and at least 100 feet before any fence. Moving beyond the general description of the facility and on to some of our development to date. As Tom mentioned and David mentioned, we hosted a public information meeting on February 25th at the Walnut Cove Public Library. Inviting people to it, we sent letters far and wide to more folks than the county requires, and had one nearby landowner and his wife attend. A total of 4 folks attended, one of them Mr. Morris here this evening, and another planning official from Walnut Cove to round out the 4. In addition, we had one neighbor, out-of-town neighbor from Cary, who called after receiving the letter and was curious, but throughout the county planning and community outreach process, we received no opposition. As far as the permits that are required for this solar farm, solar farms are permitted at a variety of levels, from the federal level down to the state and to the county level, all prior to construction. At the federal level, we're approved by the Federal Regulatory Commission, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the FAA. At the state level, this is where the majority of the regulation takes place, and it's primarily done under the jurisdiction of the North Carolina Utilities Commission, as you can imagine it being an energy facility. The Utilities Commission primary permit is a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. Our application to NCUC was submitted on February 24th. As a part of that project application, we published notice of the project in the Stokes News beginning on the 19th and progressing into April. To see those exact dates, I would direct you to Ms. Cameray's letter in that binder. The purpose of the CPCN process is in part to give both the public and state regulators the opportunity to comment on the project. The public offered no comments to the Utilities Commission, and again, we've received no opposition through this process, though published in the Stokes News. The process is moving smoothly, and we hope to have that final approval in place in the next 20 to 30 days. Some of the concurrence letters that have come as the process is ongoing, and they do not all come at once, have been offered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the North Carolina Wildlife Commission. They both have offered letters of no objection to the project as planned. In addition to the Utilities Commission, the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality offers somewhat significant permits for these projects, and they have oversight on stormwater and erosion control. They seek to ensure that we manage all the stormwater that comes onto our site and ensure that we manage it properly. As a business practice, we try to minimize the grading on the site because as a cost measure, you can understand how grading 500 acres would get expensive quite quickly. So we try to utilize as much of the existing topography as we can in putting together our water mitigation techniques. Again, just in summary there, the purpose of those permits from DEQ is to ensure that there is no runoff or erosion onto adjoining properties, existing streams, or in this case, the Dan River. At the county level, all building and electrical plans are reviewed before the issuance of building permits. The plans are put together by licensed engineers in the state of North Carolina. This process is identical to the construction of any other building, residential or commercial. Every step of the way, respected licensed engineers are providing calculations and providing the drawings with stamps and so on. With over $30 million to be invested here, we are heavily incentivized to build this thing the right way. And over the last 10 years in North Carolina, we've seen every form of severe weather, from hurricanes to tornadoes to flooding, and no solar farms have been torn apart or otherwise put out of commission. In addition to the regulatory approval, the project will also be subject to approval by our favorite utility, Duke Energy. North Carolina, at the request of Duke Energy, has focused the approval of solar on an annual RFP with the goal of integrating solar into the grid at the cheapest cost to the consumer and the lowest cost energy in the market. If everything goes to plan with the RFP like we believe that it will, we will begin construction in approximately 1 year. It's worth noting here that without a long-term contract with Duke Energy, this facility will not be constructed. It is only with that financial assurance that we have the confidence to ensure or to invest such a large amount here. County impact and the tax base increase, if I could grab this visual aid here. Mr. Morris had some questions on it. So you can see in year one, the solar farm produces an estimated $58,000 in tax revenue. Currently, the property produces approximately $2,300. This is a 2,445% increase over its current use, which is quite significant. And as you can see, the blue doesn't necessarily measure there. Over time, the blue remains pretty much a constant of the $2,300, simply multiplied by the amount of years that the solar farm is in use. And as the tax numbers remain significant, They decrease as a result of the depreciation schedules that are set forth in the Stokes County Tax Code as the project ages. But in year one, again, $58,000 from the solar farm compared to $2,300 from the current agricultural use. And in year 40, over $1 million compared to approximately $90,000 from the existing use. So very considerable delta there.
I have another question on that, if you would.
Sure.
So I just want to double check my math. $1,080,000, that is the total cumulative amount for 40 years.
40, yes, sir.
You divide that by 40, you get $27,000 a year average, right? Is that true?
I trust your math, yes, sir.
Okay. Just curious.
So again, as the system ages, with taking into account the depreciation, it's not as valuable in year 40 as it is in year 1.
Well, the chart shows all that growth and everything, but realistically, when you're looking at an economic development project, $27,000 average per year is not a lot of money compared to other things.
Compared to $2,300, we feel that it is.
Yes, more than $2,300, but it's not like a manufacturing facility that multiplies 15 times what you get compared to something like this.
Yeah, that's
$27,000 average per year.
Yes, sir. I mean, yeah, I think from Mr. Sudar's comments at the beginning, we don't feel, or he doesn't feel, that there is really much opportunity for a factory in this location given the utilities available. So to us, this and the landowner feels like the highest and best use.
Yeah, there we get into our crystal ball thing, though, looked into the future. I didn't think SpaceX would be shooting a Falcon 9
and
landing years ago and landing boosters on ships either, but lots of things can change with land. We could have some technological development that completely changed how sewer's done. All of a sudden, something that can't do sewer could do sewer easily. I mean, if you can do SpaceX, you might be able to figure out something on the sewer. So I'm not picking at you. I just don't like to make these global assumptions of the future that we really can't really see what's going to be going on 40 to 30 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, what we can do is project what this farm would produce, and that's
what
we've done
true.
Today, and try to give you an idea of what it will produce. And this is our best estimate given the mill rates that are available and the depreciation.
Well, I don't disagree with your numbers at all. I mean, I trust what you're saying there.
Okay. Any other questions on this graphic?
I see that one more time. I got mine folded up here. Now, year one, could you help me with the 58,000? Commissioner Morris is saying 27,000 a year. And what does the 58,000 represent in your chart?
That represents the year one taxation, so it is somewhat front loaded in terms of how much the county will yield from it. As the property tax is based on the appraised value of the system, and as the system ages, it will be depreciated, and so therefore the property tax derived from the project in year 40 will be based on the appraisal of a system at a lower value than it was in year one.
Right. That's how he gets the average of 27,000, because in your later years it's less considerably than it was in the early years.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
I'm with you now.
Well, the reason I've charts like that, and I've done it myself to a certain extent, so I'm not nitpicking, but when you go out and tell the community we're going to have a 2,445% increase in taxes the first year, they'll say, wow, that's a big number. 2,445%. Well, it equals $58,000. So, you know what I'm saying, right?
I do. Yeah. I mean, again, the land is currently in agricultural tax deferment, so the $58,000. I believe
the percentages really don't mean much. The real numbers you've got on there do, but the percentages they can very easily
manipulate
a little bit of a false impression.
One more question regarding the taxes. You mentioned the depreciation scale. I don't think that's has any flexibility built into it. That's state regulated and fixed, I believe.
I believe it's county regulated, but I'm not sure about
I
that.
think we have our previous tax administrator as our county manager now, and I think you remember how that depreciation scale works on machinery. Now, did you get some guidelines from the state and we have to adhere to those?
Commissioners adopt what the state puts out on business personal property, and I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, personal property.
Yes.
You also got to remember that 80% of this value is exempt by the federal and state government, so there's no taxes on that 80%.
Right.
That is considered when putting together these numbers.
Only 20% of the personal property value that you're going to collect any revenue on,
Right, and then that depreciates over time also.
and that will depreciate over the years.
And still, the numbers look enough to get my attention to some extent.
But some of this value is bound to be based on the real estate, the land, coming off of the deferment and being assessed at market value of what the county would have on it for usable residential property. It may go to $500 or $600 an acre per tax rate, where it is assessed at a deferment of $400 and some dollars an acre. So some of that's got in it, but we would still allow the farming land, what's not under these panels, to still remain on the deferment side of it.
And I don't believe that this graphic considers those taxes that will come from the residual land not used for the solar farm. And I do believe that year one considers the rollback taxes as the land is removed from agricultural tax deferment. And also, as I understand the Paley's intentions for the land, they will keep it in that agricultural tax deferment indefinitely without a higher and better use to use for it.
Thank you.
Just a quick question while we're talking about taxes, property taxes and all. I can't remember from our last one we'd sit and talked about, does this devalue the property owners around it? Does it make their property value go down any? With being right beside a solar field?
Mr. Kirkland is here this evening. He'll be presenting right after me, and he can address those concerns in full.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I got one question.
Mr. Lankford.
Yes, sir.
Did you say this was a $30 million investment?
Yes, sir. 35. As far as how much of the county's land we will utilize, doing the calculations of 500 acres into 291,000 acres, this will not even be 0.2%. Moving on to the operations and maintenance of this facility, we did not touch on it on the top, but I think it's important to mention here that the long-term owner and operator of this facility will be Capital Power. Capital Power is a Canadian company. They are publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange. They operate facilities of all kinds in the United States, gas, wind, and solar. And in the United States, they own over 1,800 megawatts of power generating capacity. In North Carolina, they own 3 facilities, including the Roxborough plant not far from here, as well as another gas plant out east and another solar farm. They've had a great experience thus far and intend to continue to invest here. And as we've seen through their actions thus far, they are a good partner to the community, investing in the communities in which they operate. So I'm just going to hit the high points on the operations and maintenance plan. Feel free to ask questions about it at the end. Having leaned on Capital Power's experience in putting this together on a daily basis, the solar farm is very passive and doesn't require any management on site, though it is monitored on a 24/7 basis remotely to ensure that it's operating properly and safely. On a monthly basis, the primary maintenance required is really just mowing the inside of the facility to ensure that the grass does not get so high as to shade the panels. And on a yearly basis, we do inspections to different aspects of the facility to ensure that the equipment and electrical connections are safe and up to code. As Tom mentioned, and as you'll see in the back of the book, one condition that we would like to impose on ourselves is to keep an updated sign on the gate providing contact information for the person or company responsible for the operations and maintenance of the solar farm. So if there is ever an issue that's noticed, it will not be difficult to contact the right person. Last but certainly not least, the decommissioning roles and responsibilities for what happens to the facility at the end of its life. The tenant, in short, Bear Branch Solar, is responsible We have coordinated and agreed with the landowner that at the end of the facility's useful life, there will be a bond or other form of security and to the benefit of the landowner in place to cover the cost of decommissioning to ensure that there is no cost to the landowners or to the county. That security will be put in place 1 year prior to the end of term and will be 110% of the decommissioning cost less the resale or salvage value of the components. That decommissioning cost estimate will be put together by a North Carolina licensed engineer. At this time, I would like to refer you to the decommissioning section in your binder. We have provided here this evening a sample decommissioning plan that was put together for a solar farm for another facility in North Carolina. And though it's not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison, we thought that it does a good job of helping folks understand what goes into the decommissioning of a solar farm and what some of the economic drivers are that are a part of it. Moving past page 1, there's a statement of essentially what this is, followed by 2 very helpful pages that describe exactly how you decommission a solar farm. So if you might look to that page, at the top it says PV modules. You will hand remove, place modules face down on pallets, tape wire ends, tied down and transport via skid steer to staging location, assume salvage value and 5% breakage. It progresses throughout the different components of the solar farm, discussing how you excavate the cable. Let's say how you take apart the racking posts with a post puller and how, again, you get these off the site so that at the end of the useful life of the solar farm, we will take it apart and restore it to a state similar to which it exists today. If you will proceed with me towards the tables in the back, this is again the numbers that were put forward for an additional solar farm. And if you're curious, however, the last page is a prorated version as it applies to Bare Branch Solar. So at the top, again, this is a repurposed estimate, but I think serves as a great educational tool. You look at the costs of the disassembly and disposal of the equipment there. So for instance, Mr. Sudorth mentioned how many panels there are. You can see PV modules at the top and how much it costs to remove it. Subtotal, how much it will cost to remove this facility, is $1.23 million. Moving down, the salvage value of the facility, you really get into some somewhat crazy numbers at the amount of pounds that are involved with this thing in terms of the recyclable metals. These solar farms are comprised of solar panels, copper conduiting, aluminum racking, steel I-beams, and standard chain link fencing. All of that material is a commodity metal which can be recycled. If you look at the salvage value here, you can see, for instance, the single axis racking frame, there are 5 million pounds of that on site. Assuming a discounted cost associated with that, it produces a salvage value there, and when totaling that up, the salvage value of the system in the field is $4.7 million. As you can see, when netting out those two numbers, the salvage value and the disassembly cost, there is a $3.4 million benefit to removing all this equipment and metal from the field. In the case that is not to happen, there is still the decommissioning bond in favor of the property owner, so that if this does not hold up to the test of time, there will be a third party who has that security in place that the landowner can call on if need be and see to the removal of it themselves. In addition, it's worth noting, talking about House Bill 329, when speaking with Speaker Moore and some of the other House leadership, they understand the importance of solar to rural counties in North Carolina, both out east and across the state. And they also understand the benefits that solar has provided over the years. So their effort in seeking to put together a decommissioning plan is to standardize that approach across the state to give both counties, landowners, and developers more clarity as to what the path forward will be. So what we have proposed and prepared today, we believe is more stringent and goes beyond what the state law seeks to or will impose. However, without those details coming forth yet, we can't say that definitively. That's simply our belief. So in closing, I would like to say that in all our years of developing solar in the Carolinas, we have never had a solar farm so invisible and have so little impact on neighbors as Bear Branch Solar. Thank you. At this time, if you wouldn't mind holding some of your questions until the end of the presentation, I'll invite Mr. Kirkland up here as he may answer some of those questions, and we'll proceed from there.
Thank you.
It's an interesting little chute you have us standing in. Good evening. My name's Rich Kirkland. I'm a state certified appraiser in North Carolina. I've been appraising for about 25 years in the state. I'm also an MAI through the Appraisal Institute. I've regularly appraised agricultural products and projects. I look at commercial agriculture. I look at residential subdivision development, commercial properties, things of that nature. I also do impact analysis on a wide range of different uses, but tonight I've been asked to look at and discuss solar farms. I've been looking at solar farms, specifically in North Carolina, but also in about 17 other states. I've been looking at these for about 9 years. I've looked at about 680 or so solar farms at this point, and I've really been compiling what are around solar farms, where are they located, how close do they get to adjoining properties, and also looking for sales next to solar farms so I can measure to see if there's been any impact on those property values, just to address your question. The methodology you use for looking at whether or not there's an impact is called a paired sales analysis or a matched pair analysis. This is a very standard appraisal tool that's used essentially in all appraisals. Whenever someone appraises your house and they compare and they look at other properties, they make those minor adjustments throughout it. Whether, you know, this is just like your house, but this one has a garage. Well, there's an adjustment that comes in there, and that adjustment is derived from matched pairs, or at least it should be. Matched pairs is really just to address the differences between one property and another. And what you do is you, in the case of a solar farm, you would look for a sale next to a solar farm, and you'd compare that same, a similar property, as close to that as in time and space and other features, and look to see if there's anything that you would attribute to the solar farm. If you have two identical properties and the only difference is the solar farm, whatever's left over you would attribute to the solar farm. Again, this is the technique used by the banks, it's used by the IRS, it's, you know, this is accepted appraisal technique. It's put forward by the Appraisal Institute. It's taught in the textbooks put out by the Appraisal Institute, the Appraisal of Real Estate textbook. Dr. Randall Bell is a PhD and MAI. He wrote a book on specifically looking at real estate damages, a book called Real Estate Damages put out by the Appraisal Institute. He again outlines very step-by-step processes, and I've gone about following Dr. Bell's methodology. And that